Thank you, Bill. Our speaker today is Andrew Bartolotti, who was promoted to the Chief of Police in June of 2020 upon the retirement of Chief Robert Weck, who spoke to us about 2 or 3 years ago in person in New Providence. He joined the Summit Police Department in 2000, coming from Manasquan, promoted to detective, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and finally the chief of police. During his career, he earned a bachelor's and master's degree from Fairleigh Dickinson, and he was selected a few years ago as one of only 15 law enforcement executives to represent the state of New Jersey and train in Great Britain, period. In 2017, he represented the city of Summit and the police department with distinction when he was selected as one of only 6 law enforcement executives from the state of New Jersey to attend the FBI Academy in Quantico. During his career, he's received numerous awards and commendations, including a Samaritan Award for assisting the rescue and recovery operations following the 9/11 attacks. He will speak today on COVID-19, the current situation, challenges faced in our community, and increase in any crimes of opportunity and prevention methods. It's my pleasure to introduce Chief Andrew Bartolotti.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I apologize for the black screen on and off earlier during the beginning of the meeting. We're dealing with the delivery of the vaccine today to New Jersey, which I'll touch on a little bit. We're also doing some pre-storm planning in anticipation of a snowstorm. So the work never stops, even though we have some other things to attend to. But I am here right now, and for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so, I have a presentation for you. It's jam-packed with a lot of information. So I will guide you all through it very simply and easily. And really what I'm looking to do is just kind of give you, as we all could say, 2020 has been a year like no other. And that has certainly been true for law enforcement. And I'd like to kind of give you an overview of what 2020 looked like for the Summit Police Department. Now, I will not be able to do that justice in just this few short moments, but I hope you gain from it some insight to what the challenges are for the police department. And while I'll touch on mostly the Summit Police Department, you can rest assured that police departments throughout New Jersey, especially this region, especially New Providence as well, have all faced extremely similar challenges as we go. So let me just set up the screen share here. And just a programming note, we will have, there will be some video footage as part of this presentation, and in doing some testing, it will depend obviously on your personal internet connections as to whether or not how that video plays. So you might see some lag, some of you may see it crystal clear, but we'll do our best to get it through it. So what I want to start off with initially is our response to COVID. We used a 12-week operational period, and really what we looked at was on March 16th is when the Summit Police Department and many organizations, police organizations around the area, transitioned to what we call a COVID operational period. And that lasted 12 weeks for the Summit Police Department. And what that entailed was, like most, looking back to March, we had no idea really what we were dealing with. And in law enforcement, we often know what type of situations we're dealing with, what types of crime trends we're dealing with. And when it came to this particular health pandemic, it was the unknown enemy that we had to face. And that is a threat, so to speak, that is not within the comfort zone of law enforcement because we don't know. So we had to quickly learn, understand. We had to look at various different things on how we were going to operate internally, how this was going to have an impact on our staff, what the potential for impact would be to our staff, how we could best educate our staff and get our people protected without stopping operations, because as we know, the role of police in the community doesn't stop just so that we could take time out to learn something new coming our way. So we had to adapt in a lot of different ways. The impact that we faced during that 12-week period and started to slowly come out of it to where we are today, perhaps the biggest one was our staffing levels. And our organization, from my position all the way down to our newest officer, is only 47 people. It might sound like a lot, but across our various units and operational bureaus, there's only about 26 patrol officers and 6 patrol supervisors within the front lines. Those are the officers that you see in uniform every day and police cars responding call to call. And that's not a lot of personnel to get the job done. So what we did on March 16th, after spending hours in this room that I am in now, is we reorganized our staffing levels, re-engineered our deployment tactics, and basically we created 2 Summit Police Departments. We created Department A and Department B. And the concept behind that was we sent half of our workforce to quarantine for a period of 14 days at a time, while the other half of our department was working. And then within those 2 halves, we then cut it again into quadrants. So altogether, we had 4 different patrol operations across 2 different departments, so to speak. And at any given time, we had 1 group of officers working 12-hour shifts and another companion, so to speak, in reserve on the ready. So the concept there was that if we had an impact of the COVID virus into our workforce, we would take that entire shift out of service, send them home to quarantine, and call up the reserve shift within an hour's response time. And we maintained that staffing level for that 12-week operational period. And I'll go back to that in a little bit to kind of tell you what we learned from that. Our administrative services all kind of took a back seat. Our records function, our traffic services, all suspended during that 12-week period. All of our non-essential personnel, civilian personnel, were all sent home, set up remotely. That is a challenge that we had to face. We're all experts at this point now in virtual communication, but back then in March, not that long ago, that is not something that we ever practiced or were accustomed to. To this day, we still have our administrative personnel are working a hybrid schedule, combination between home and school, and a lot of that has to do with the impact that we see now within the school systems and their children. One of the major impacts, another major impact to us, was the suspension of in-person training. We take pride in our training. We do a lot of training, and to suspend that, not only for the 12-week period, but that is still presently suspended at this time, just to kind of keep that virus at bay. So what that resulted in for us during that 12-week period is what you see on the screen here now. And the big number there, the 16,000 number, that's hours of operational readiness. That is man hours of officers and supervisors alike here actively protecting the city of Summit and actively in a reserve status, ready to be called up within a moment's notice. Our calls for service, believe it or not, while they decreased on one end, they increased on the other as the community tried to face a pandemic that they knew nothing about, and they were looking for answers and comfort from every direction. And those calls predominantly came into the police department and then the EMS service as well. 252 operational briefings. That is a tremendous amount of operational briefings for us. What that consisted of is daily statewide briefing calls with the New Jersey State Police, the Office of Emergency Management, the Attorney General's Office, and the Governor's Office. Those went on continuously every day for those 12 weeks. We are now down to twice a week. I just had one this morning. And then the best number and the number that we are proud of the most is that bottom number, 0 positive cases. Now, you're all probably aware that Chief Weck, prior to his retirement, did test positive for the virus. And that was just slightly ahead of this operational period of 12 weeks that I'm talking about. So looking at that 12-week period, taking our department, cutting it into two departments, we believe that saved us from having the virus infiltrate our organization and ultimately spreading down to the families of our members. Present day, although we have one active case at the moment, that is the only positive case that the Summit Police Department or by extension, our officers' families have been exposed to. So that's something that we're very proud of. This is just a quick snapshot, and for you viewing at home, the text might be a little small, but this is just kind of where we are right now in the United States with over 16 million cases within the US. And just to kind of give you some local statistics, Union County, 32,000 cases with just under 1,500 deaths across the county. And then taking that down into Summit and New Providence, 848 cases for Summit since March, 361 for New Providence since March. Noted down the bottom there is something to know. We heard about the second wave coming. We're seeing that in the numbers with already for December, 114 cases, positive cases within the city. Now, those increase and the second wave numbers could be attributed to the fact that there is more widespread testing. So we are seeing a lot more testing being done, where in March that wasn't the case. So the big question that everybody might be having is, what are we doing about COVID-19 and the vaccine? The vaccine is being delivered to New Jersey. I believe it's already here. It was being delivered this morning and administered already. I believe there was a news conference just early this morning. It's anticipated that New Jersey will get about 500,000 doses by January 1st. That is still unconfirmed. As I mentioned with the state briefings, law enforcement, we hope to know more on that as the days come. But the way that the state has outlined its vaccination plan is basically into 3 phases, with phase 1 being the essential workers, and predominantly that falls to all licensed healthcare workers. So that would be your doctors, your nurses, your physical therapists, paramedics, EMS, anybody that's working, has a potential of coming into close contact with the virus as a regular course of their business. Now you might say that police and fire might be on that list as well. We are considered essential workers, but the healthcare industry and those workers, we're going to get preference over and above law enforcement and local EMS and fire. However, we are all considered to be part of phase 1. And then that high-risk population. So high-risk population, and if I could spend quite a bit of time on this, but you can go to the state's website for more information on what their vaccination plan is. But the high-risk population is going to be anybody that falls into the category of age 65 or older and or has any underlying medical conditions would be looking to do that. Now, I will tell you that while the state has this plan on paper, the actual deployment methodology has not really been developed just yet. So the way the state's going to be rolling this out is they're going to be relying on the county health departments and the county offices of emergency management to kind of get that all together. But I would imagine from the chatter that I'm hearing that this would be some kind of distribution center, just like the testing center that's up at King University. So we might see something coming along the lines of that. And then phase 2 and 3 is really dependent on the number of doses that the state of New Jersey gets over the next course of a couple of weeks and into the months, with basically looking backwards. So if we get to phase 2, where a larger quantity of vaccine comes in, they're going to catch up on any leftovers from phase 1 and then move into the general population and so on down the line. That's just a quick overview on what COVID did to us, where we are with COVID. We're still struggling with that internally, but we have a better understanding of where we need to be, and we expect to see some widespread changes that come out of this in our operations going forward. As I mentioned, I have a lot in this slide, and one of the things I do want to talk about is some of the crime trends that we're seeing. And the layout of this presentation is kind of somewhat chronological in the year of 2020. Where the first couple of months we really kind of just adjusted to the new year, then hit by COVID, and then as a result of COVID, we were hit in some New Providence surrounding towns with just an increased rash of motor vehicle theft. So you'll see, on this slide that motor vehicle theft across the state for 2020 is down 4% from where it was last year, but you can see very clearly that in Union and Morris counties we are well up. And just in Summit alone, we saw an increase of 188% from where we were last year. Tremendous increase in auto theft. A lot of that is attributed to COVID when we were tracking these numbers locally and throughout the state. In the months of March and April, we saw relatively little to no criminal activity. As the end of April and May and a spike in June as the world started to feel comfortable with coming out of their house, so did the criminal element, and they targeted the suburban areas. And this is throughout the state.
Hello, I'm Officer Sean Thompson, and I would like to speak to you about automobile theft in Summit. Nationally, more vehicles were stolen this year than in any single year since 2009. And the biggest reason might have nothing to do with the criminals being cunning. Every car stolen in Summit this year, more than 25 of them, were all left unlocked with either the key fob or valet key left inside. All thieves need to do is find a car where someone has left the key inside, push the start button, and hit the gas. While Summit police officers routinely patrol 80 miles of Summit roadways and keep watch for the safety of our more than 6,000 residential properties and area businesses, we need your help in deterring auto theft criminals. Please do not leave your cars unlocked or the keys inside when unattended. Security footage provided by homeowners clearly shows actors checking car door handles of vehicles for an unlocked door as they move from house to house. Do not make your block an easy target. Never leave valuables in cars and keep garage door openers out of sight. If valuables must be left in your vehicle when it's unattended, lock them in the trunk. These simple steps are all we need to eliminate vehicle theft in Summit. Please do your part and join us in keeping Summit safe. Thank you.
So that is a PSA that we put together, we shot and put together for the public in response to these incidents right here that you're seeing on the screen. These are not stock photographs. These are actual Summit police vehicles that were involved in investigations for stolen cars in and around April and May. And you know, that top heading there, I'm still kind of getting chills just thinking about it. Officer Anthony Pizek was involved in a head-on collision and his vehicle is the one on the right there. Suspect that stole a motor vehicle out of a neighboring jurisdiction fled through the city of Summit. Officer Pizek was traveling on Morris Avenue, not engaged in the incident or the pursuit. And as he came around the curve just past Glenside Avenue up around the hospital, the stolen vehicle was on the opposite side of the road trying to flee police from the neighboring jurisdiction and hit Officer Pizek head on. Officer Pizek still remains out of work, still undergoing surgeries. I can't even remember the amount of surgeries that he's had so far, but he is in great spirits. He is up and walking around. He is eager to get back, but unfortunately he has an extremely long road ahead of him. But we are hopeful that we will see him back here in the too distant future. The other two remaining vehicles were also part of, shortly thereafter. And again, looking at this from a chronological order, coming off of the COVID and the unknown and trying to keep our personnel in the city safe, to dealing with a rash of car thefts, to dealing with a midnight officer-involved accident that resulted in multiple surgeries. Just coming off of that, not even 90 days later, a second incident involving a stolen vehicle in Summit and an officer being injured and out of work and requiring surgery as well. That second officer is Keith Kwiatek, who is happy to report that he is back to work after successful surgery to repair his injuries. And then the third one there, Officer Tesorio, who is also back, but also is out due to injury. Fortunately for him, he did not require any surgeries to repair his injuries. But nonetheless, it hits home when one of our own officers are injured, and all of these cars in Summit, as Officer Thompson said in his video, were left unlocked with the keys inside. Very preventable crime, and really you'll see the theme throughout all of this is that it's crimes of opportunity. And as citizens, not even the police, but just as regular citizens, myself included, we have an obligation and the ability to stop this by just taking away the opportunity. You'll see in a couple of more videos that come up how we talk about getting rid of opportunity and stopping the criminal element from coming into our community. And it just simply takes just locking the car. And we have the footage from local in Summit and throughout the state that you saw in the PSA of these individuals just checking car door handles. And I can't tell you with 106 people on this call right now, I'm sure that there's a good majority of your cars that were tested. But fortunately, you've had them locked and the individuals continue on to your neighbor's house. And the goal is that if everybody's got their cars locked and their garage doors closed, and we push these criminals to another area and likewise in other communities, they just keep getting pushed until they're totally out of our region. Immediately following those accidents, we were met with the recovery of Chief Weck from the coronavirus and then his retirement, which was effective on May 30th. His last day of work, as you see there in the picture, was May 29th, after 31 years of service to the city of Summit. The very next day, or next Monday on June 1st, I took over as chief. And what you see down the bottom there is that normally the transition to chief is an exciting one, but with everything going on, there was no ceremonial aspect of it, which was okay. But what it did do is it created, so to speak, a domino effect of a series of promotions, assignments, and new hires. So not only were we dealing with COVID, a rash of car burglaries, injured officers, reduction in equipment and vehicles, retirement of a chief, a transition to a new chief, and then we had the promotions and transitions and training of a new captain, a new lieutenant, a new sergeant, a detective, and then 3 new hires. And I point out Officer Jaramello at the end there. I just met with her yesterday. She is our newest officer and set to attend the academy in February. So that is another aspect of kind of what we got going on. Immediately following the swearing in of myself and Captain Proctor on June 1st, on June 2nd, Summit was impacted by the tragic and senseless death of George Floyd, where approximately 1,500 people gathered in Summit to protest for racial equity and justice. And across the series of about 5 days, 6 days, or so to speak, there were about 5 protests within the city of Summit, another, I believe, 4 or so in the borough of New Providence, one of which transcended between both communities. The police department's involvement in all of these was extraordinary in the sense that we were able to facilitate a partnership with each of the organizers for each of these protest marches, as well as Chief Gasway in New Providence with her department and her community. And I believe truly that those partnerships and that coordination between the police departments and the organizers for each of these events is what led them to be successful and allowed the community's voice to be heard on such an important matter. From there, a couple of things changed. As a new chief, again, 3rd day in, and what my outlook for the organization was going to be going into the future on the heels of a national uprise and uncertainty and a call for change and reform in policing. We embarked and continue today to do a complete, thorough review and overhaul of our internal operations within the police department, including our policy review process, a organizational culture review process. We instituted a electronic digital warning system that identifies how we are serving the public and what we're doing and how we're going about that and where we can make changes for the good. Use of force reporting, if you followed the news coming out of the Attorney General's office, use of force is undergoing a complete revamp, including the way that local organizations report on that. And that is now being collected digitally across the state into a statewide database for accountability and transparency. Our training increased, and we continued with a lot of training that we had, immigration trust training and how we deal with people with immigration status. We are not an ICE community in the sense that we go out and detain illegal immigrants on behalf of ICE and the federal government. Our implicit bias training continued as well, our de-escalation training. And really cultural awareness and diversity is a big one that we've always had as well, along with mandates that have now started to come out from the Attorney General's office. Before going into the middle block there, I just want to touch base on training for a little bit, because during the national unrest and protests that we saw mainly in June and into July, there was nationwide call for police reform. And police reform is not an ugly term, it's not a bad thing. It is necessary for law enforcement to look at the way that we do business. And, while there's a national call for that and it's important, the New Jersey Attorney General, the Superintendent of State Police, all 21 county prosecutors, and down through that, organizations such as the State Chiefs of Police Association or local county chiefs associations, all signed on to take this on as a matter of importance in New Jersey. And we are fortunate in the sense that when we compared New Jersey's policies, procedures, and training in areas such as de-escalation and cultural awareness, diversity, and use of force, we are above the national standard in New Jersey, and we have been for quite some time. And just one example of that, if you read in the news recently, is that the governor just signed legislation that New Jersey law enforcement will be mandated to have body cameras. Body cameras in New Jersey have been here for quite some time. The Suffolk Police Department has instituted body cameras as early as 2017, and we have been since that point, as well as I know New Providence Police Department as well as body cameras. So we are very much ahead of the curve, but knowing that the state is ahead of the curve, it does not give us pause to say that we have mastered everything. So there's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion in what policing in New Jersey is going to look like going into the future. And there's been a commitment across the state to partner with the Attorney General. What happened locally here is the Suffolk Police Department now has a seat on the Mayor's Forum of Diversity. We did not for quite some time, but we are there. And along with Mayor Radis, I had attended one of the most recent meetings that we had, albeit virtual, such as this one. And these are just some of the other communities and groups that the Suffolk Police Department has been involved in over the last couple of months, including just recently completing race dialogue circles with the Interfaith Council Anti-Racism Committee, along with members of our command staff and leadership here. And I won't spend too much time on this one because I just kind of covered that in the previous slide, but this is the left-hand slide, or both are posted on our city's website. And basically what it talks about is on the right, that is known as the National 8 Can't Wait campaign. And what it's asking for is for law enforcement to adopt these 8 principles. And the belief is that if these 8 principles are adopted by law enforcement, the amount of use of force situations and deadly force situations that we're seeing played out throughout the country will diminish and decrease. And I'm happy to report that all of these policy initiatives that are being asked for law enforcement nationwide have been part of New Jersey's policy for years. And that's where I talk about that we are ahead of the curve. So those 8 things that you see there on the right, those are embedded in the state's use of force policy, and trickles down to the Summit Police Department's and New Providence. I could speak to theirs use of force policy because we adopt the standard of the Attorney General. Next big thing as we enter the holiday season is scams. And we see scams coming up a lot during the holiday seasons. It's when people are kind of at their most vulnerable, in the sense that we have a lot going on with the holidays around us, and it's easy criminals target select groups. The next slide is going to be a video, and it's an important video, and it's one that I think affects senior citizens in the sense that you'll hear the narrator and the officer that's put this piece together talk about how grandparents especially have a whole sense of pride for their grandchildren and willing to go to great lengths. And this is something that we've seen play out in New Jersey. It happens across the nation. And it's one of the hardest things for law enforcement to investigate and prosecute, because we see a lot of these scams take place overseas. In this particular piece, you'll see, you'll be surprised to learn where it comes from. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but let me play this now for you.
Hi, Grandpa. Hi. You know who this is? Randy? Yeah. What's the matter? I've been in a car wreck. Are you hurt, Dad?
It sure sounded like him on the phone. I'd have swore on a stack of Bibles it was him.
Orville and Dorothy Shanafelt of Portland, Oregon, thought they were talking to their grandson, Randy, and it sounded like he needed help.
Were you hurt, Dad? My ribs and my jaw. That's why I'm talking the way I am.
The con man convinced them to drive to a Western Union and wire him $550 that he said he needed to get his car out of the tow yard.
We'd do anything to help any of our grandkids.
He even convinced them not to tell anyone else in the family.
Grandma, I don't want Mom, I don't want nobody to know. We won't tell your mother then.
How's the scam work? First, the con artist searches the telephone book looking for old-fashioned sounding names.
My victims were Dolores, Dorothy's, Ruth, Alberta.
Sheriff's Deputy Holly Hasse says the cunning con artist tricked dozens of grandparents into giving him their grandsons' names.
Hi, Grandma. Who is this? Your favorite grandson. Gary? Yes. What's the matter, dear?
There is a relationship between grandkids and grandparents that grandparents, they aren't going to ask a lot of questions. If their grandkid's in trouble, they're going to do whatever it takes.
Is there any way you can take a cab to the bank?
Go to the bank.
Yeah?
And it'll take me a little while because I use a walker.
I know you use a walk, Grandma.
In my book, a wimp, a spineless little wimp. You know, you just don't harm children and you just don't take advantage of our senior citizens.
So where was the person who was scamming Grandma and Grandpa out of their money calling from? Well, you may not believe it, but he was calling from right here, a county jail in Portland, just miles from their home. That's right, the caller was an inmate, Stephen Lee Brown, and he was having the victims wire the money to his relatives. Luckily, all inmate phone calls are recorded, and the scam was exposed. Unfortunately, a lot of these crimes are never solved.
No.
You were lucky that you had these tapes.
Yep.
And it's happening all across the country.
It was a perfect setup, and these people knew exactly what they were doing.
Edward and Irene Kellerman, who live outside of Cleveland, Ohio, fell victim to another con man who has never been caught.
You felt stupid that you were taken by a scam. I mean, this is foremost. Secondly, you're embarrassed.
The phone scammer convinced them he was their grandson, Brian, and got them to drive to their local Walmart to send a $3,000 MoneyGram.
We had this close association with all of our grandchildren. We would have done it for any one of them.
It really hurt. I mean, because we're retired. We live on Social Security and a couple small dividends.
Back in Oregon, I played the Shanafelts the tape of the con man who tricked them. He's now serving a 17-year sentence for elderly fraud. But they still think the crook sounds just like their grandson. Even listening to this now, you still think it sounds like him.
Yes, it does. Wouldn't it to you?
Hi, Grandma.
All right, so that's obviously one example. I want to talk about another one, distraction burglaries. But before I do, I could spend an hour or so, even more, just on the number of different scams that are out there. So without jam-packing this presentation with all of that, I just wanted to stop for a moment and just kind of, in between these two, talk about some other ones. First off, it is very difficult to investigate these, and a lot of the reasons behind that is the victims are very reluctant to come forward. So if there's a message that I want to put out there, obviously one is to be very cautious of things that may not appear to be true, but on the second hand is, if anybody does become a victim of one of these scams, it's very important to report it. And I know from talking to victims in the past, it's the embarrassment factor of having fallen for such a scam that prevents people from coming forward a lot of the times. And I want everyone to know and to take that message out that that is not something you have to concern yourselves with when speaking to the police department. We recognize that, we understand that. The people perpetrating these crimes are professionals at what they do. And we're trying desperately to get the word out because it is very difficult to investigate and prosecute. One of the main reasons that is true is because a lot of these scams, especially the ones on the internet and financial scams, are being perpetrated from overseas. And a lot of them are coming out of Nigeria and areas across the globe. So some of the things that tips that you could take for yourself, especially online, is never click on an email or a video link that you're not expecting. So using this meeting as an example, the organizers sent out their meeting link for everybody to click on, and it's an open meeting link. And if you were not expecting that, or you were new to that, you should be cautious about clicking on something or opening something in an email that you're not aware of. It's always best to just verify with the sender. If you know the sender, if you don't know the sender, chances are they shouldn't be sending you anything to begin with. And some of these links, they disguise themselves, and as technology advances, which is advancing rapidly as we speak, you might click on something and it appears that nothing is happening, but what you actually did was activated a program in the background that you'll never see that is searching for things like bank account information, social security number information, so on and so forth. So if you ever are a victim of that, hopefully nobody is, but definitely contact law enforcement because we'll be able to provide you with additional resources and steps that you could take to protect your identity further if you are susceptible to something like that. Another big one that we see during the holidays is distraction burglaries. And this next video clip was shot locally. It was shot, as you will see, because he makes an appearance in the video, by Detective Matthew Tarantino from our department, who was lost in 2007. And this is one of the pieces that he put together, and we found it in the archive, so to speak. And it didn't get much publicity then, but the message still resonates today, and I couldn't think of anybody better to deliver it than Matt himself.
Back at 7:42 now with GMA on the lookout and a warning for all of us. Thieves are using creative ways to break into our homes, being allowed to walk right in the front door. ABC's Gio Benitez went undercover to show how they're doing it and how you can protect yourself and your family.
To demonstrate how it can happen and to warn viewers, I'm going undercover, disguised as a water company worker. Equipped with a fluorescent vest, hard hat, clipboard, and a walkie-talkie. All easily purchased online for about $60.
Place your order.
Let's go. My team dropping me in Summit, New Jersey.
We're gonna knock on these doors and see what happens. See if these people let us in when we tell them we're with the water company. And obviously, we're not.
Our cameras, producers, and members of the Summit Police Department watching from the street, out of sight.
Certainly looks official. Here we go.
Hi, how are you? Hey, I'm with the water company. We're just checking water pressure. We're just checking water pressure around town. You mind if I check your faucet in the kitchen?
To our surprise,
mind if I check your kitchen faucet?
Oh, no, come on.
She let him right in.
Within seconds of meeting a total stranger, 6 of the 7 homeowners who enter the door invite me inside.
So these people think that I'm taking official notes here, but I'm just doodling.
But I immediately come clean.
Before I come in, I should tell you, my name is actually Gio Benitez, and I'm with ABC News. We're with ABC News, and we have cameras here.
All right, let's go.
Why were you so willing to let us in?
The helmet worked out well. I was looking for a badge, though.
Want to come in?
Sure, but let your guard down.
I saw the cap, I saw the clipboard, and I just thought you were authentic.
Would you believe that this whole getup, including the walkie-talkie, $60?
Oftentimes, what you don't see that you also have to be concerned about. You don't know the capabilities of the person that's entering your home. If someone's
you don't know
trying
if they
to
have a weapon, you have no idea.
Exactly.
Only one person asked for ID.
Mind if I check your kitchen faucet?
Can you show me some ID?
Ah, you asked the right question. You are now the first one to actually ask for ID.
We show Terry our results.
People just have a natural trust, and these imposters kind of play off that trust.
I appreciate it, guys. Teaching me a lesson.
A high five for doing the right thing.
Thanks.
And utility companies say it's extremely rare for a worker to even come to your door unannounced. So if they come knocking, just make sure you ask for that photo ID and look for that truck outside with the company logo. If you really want to check, call that utility company or even the police. Just don't feel bad about that, right?
I'm just going to stop it right there because the next one auto plays. Distraction burglaries are a big one, and they come and go every year, throughout the year, all the time. We're seeing that trend throughout the state, throughout the country. It's a very easy scam to pull off because people are very trusting, and really all you have to do is just kind of look at the Summit New Providence area. The amount of construction that goes on in those two municipalities, more so in Summit, it seems like it's every day. And if anybody lives around the Kent Place Boulevard area, you know that has been kind of a disaster for months with all the road work and utility work going on there. So it would not be uncommon for a PSE&G or American Water Company person to come up to your door to let you know that they're going to be doing some service. And as a matter of fact, we know PSE&G is looking to schedule over the next year or so upgrades to residential meters. So we might see that. Best thing, don't let anybody in your home. Ask for identification. And if you're still unsure or uneasy about that, you can call the police department and we'll assist you. It becomes an increasing around the holidays because, as I said earlier in the presentation, when the holidays kind of roll around, we're all engaged in a lot of different things going on at once, and maybe our guard is not as high as it would be during a part of the year that is not so crazy and hectic. And just on the holidays, and that'll take us into the last video that I had. With the holidays approaching, excuse me, another crime prevention tip is following holidays and gift giving. There's a lot of garbage that goes out to the curbs, boxes and so on and so forth of different electronic items that you've got, whether it's big screen TVs, kids with their video consoles. It just kind of invites the criminal element into what you have new in your home. And the way these distraction burglaries kind of take place is that's kind of what they're looking for. They take your guard away, and then a second actor will come through your front door, or they'll come through your back door, depending on how you've been. So we're at the part of the program where I'm going to wrap it up with a video. In speaking with your organizers earlier, they had told me that typically when you folks meet in person, there's a period of singing that goes along with the meeting. So I thought with the holiday season upon us, let me share with you a video that was put together by our community policing unit that has some holiday music to it, but it has some comedy to it, but at the same time has a very important message to it. That concludes my presentation. I want to again thank you for your time here today. I hope you found the information in there informative. As I said, I could not do 2020 justice for what the police department had gone through this year. You know, and I speak, I know a lot of the members are also from New Providence, and speaking and working closely with Chief Gazaway from New Providence, I know they've had an extremely trying year as well with changes in their organization. But the takeaway that I'd like to leave you with is to wish you all a happy and healthy holiday. I pray that 2021 will bring much needed change for everyone, and that you all stay safe and stay healthy. And I'm open for questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Chief, for a very informative and educational program. I'm sure our members enjoyed it tremendously. Now I guess we have the question and answer. If everybody will raise their blue hand, whoever would like to ask a question. And I think, Mark, you're the host. I'll call on people.
Yes. Please restrict yourself to one short question so that other people can take their turn. The first question is from Joe McMenemy. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chief. A very interesting talk. I'm curious as to what extent Summit Police have placed and utilized surveillance cameras at various public places like the train station throughout the downtown area. It seems to me that they could be very, very beneficial in A, knowing where to send your patrolmen who are patrolling the town, as well as preventing crime and solving crimes. So could you address that?
Sure, absolutely. Great question. The city does have surveillance cameras in and around the central business district, predominantly along Union Place in front of the train station, as well as Summit Avenue. There's a capital improvement project plan that's looking at increasing the amount of cameras throughout the downtown along Springfield Avenue and other parts of the city. Other city departments, such as Department of Community Programs and the Parking Authority, have capital projects for 2021 to incorporate surveillance cameras into their facilities, such as the community pool, all the parking garages. Additionally, we have camera footage ability throughout the Board of Education and their facilities. And our Detective Bureau is working with a two-part project. The first part is our commercial business project, and the second would be the residential side of the project. The commercial side of this project is, and it's a community-based networked camera project. The commercial side is underway right now in the sense that we're developing a database of all commercially available video cameras, surveillance cameras that our commercial establishments, be it retail stores or office complexes, have throughout the city, and our ability to leverage those cameras for investigative purposes. And then the second part of that project, when it rolls out, will be the residential side, where Summit residents that wish to participate in the project would offer us the ability to leverage their cameras in investigations. And it would basically be from a residential standpoint. It would be from a request-based agreement, in the sense that the police department would not have the ability and control of individuals' surveillance, residential surveillance system, but merely it's a partnership to say that a resident agrees to support the police department in an investigation, that should we need it, we can come to you and request it.
Next question, Mortimer O'Shea.
Hi, Chief. Great presentation. My question, is it difficult to hire Black police officers? Thanks.
The difficulty that we are seeing locally, as well as throughout the state, and from what I understand throughout the country, is the ability to onboard officers at this point in time. In New Jersey, there's a couple of things that are happening in terms of hiring police officers, and there's a couple of things that are happening in terms of retirements of police officers in New Jersey that's having an effect across the entire state. And then throw COVID on top of that as well. What we're seeing is a lot of officers have taken advantage of retirement this year in 2020. And you know, I think there's a number of reasons for that. What that has done as compared to any other year, it has created openings in departments across the state. Filling those openings is extremely challenging. Early in my presentation, I had a picture of the new officers on there, and Officer Jaramello. Her hire is to replace Chief Weck, who retired. We announced his retirement earlier this year. It took us almost 11 months to get somebody onboarded, only to find out that the academy that she needs to attend has been postponed now for 3 months out, and as I mentioned, hopefully in February. So we are changing and looking at the way that we are recruiting. To answer your question directly, I don't think it's difficult. It just takes different hiring practices, and we're looking at really how we've conducted hiring in the past and how we've advertised for hiring in the past. And we are taking more of a model of a recruitment process at this point for all of our hires, regardless of what their backgrounds look like. And our goal is that we get the Summit Police Department to match the community that we serve across all areas.
Next question, Jim Blinn.
Yes, I enjoyed the presentation. I was curious to know if you have currently any drones as part of your department, or if you're looking into adding drones.
We currently do not have drones within our organization. We've had a request internally from officers that find that technology engaging and participate in that technology in their personal lives. It is not something that we've had or looked into, but it has been brought to our attention, and something that as a county that we're looking at and the bigger group in the County Chiefs Police Association to see how drones can be incorporated into law enforcement. There is some statistical background knowledge that we could look at throughout other departments within the state and throughout the country. I know drones are being used a lot outside of New Jersey, and Sometimes technology such as that is a little slow to get into New Jersey, but it is here, and it's something that we do want to look into.
Thank you.
Rich Jager, please.
Thank you very much, Chief. I want to ask you your feelings about turnover at all levels of the police department. I see an issue there of getting new ideas and new blood in versus maintaining stability. And I'd like to get your thoughts about turnover.
Turnover has been something that has impacted us greatly. And under the best of circumstances, a normal transition from one chief to another is a major undertaking. Now throw in everything that kind of went on this year, it's almost a monumentous task. And we anticipate more turnover coming as we look at our officers and the careers. We can look back historically and we can project a little forward to say, you know, we have groups of officers that were hired together. Presumably those groups of officers relatively close to one another will retire around the same time. So as I sit here today, we have about a little over half a dozen officers that if they decided to retire tomorrow, they are eligible and could walk out the door. Fortunately, we do not have that situation, but we do have one retirement coming up within the next couple of weeks, I believe it is, actually next week. That's going to impact us again. It's going to short us on our availability of manpower. Leadership at the top, while some of us have been in the leadership positions for some time, change always brings different avenue, different ideas. So as I talked about earlier, one of the main goals of my tenure as chief is to do a department-wide review of not only our policy procedure and how we do things, but on our culture. And that culture takes everything into account, from how we welcome in new officers, how we say goodbye to officers retiring, how we engage those new officers into the community, how we represent the community. So this is not, it's a conversation that's ongoing here. It's a commitment that has been made from myself across the command staff. And it's a new way of looking at things, and I'm excited for what the future's gonna hold.
Next question from Walt Meissner.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for a good presentation and nice videos. You mentioned, you know, the car break-ins. I'm in Morris Township, and I get the Nixle notices from the local police, and they have the same similar message. The interesting thing about that is, you know, people are locking their doors to their cars and stuff like that. And the last message they had is they've actually had broken windows in cars, so they're upping their game. And the other thing people have to think about is if they have the garage door opener, a lot of people don't keep the doors locked from the garage to the home if they have an attached garage. My wife actually had a check stolen out of the mailbox that was washed and changed to $15,000 and caused her a bunch of grief back in April, I believe.
You need to shorten your question, please.
Yeah, okay. It seems to me there are people a lot more desperate during this COVID part because they're out of jobs. How much of an increase in crimes do you attribute to COVID?
You know, I can't say with any certainty what is a COVID-related crime. What I can tell you is that we saw a tremendous increase during that 12-week operational period that I talked about, so the March, April, May, and into June period. Tremendous increase in theft of vehicles, 188% increase. We saw a tremendous increase in theft from motor vehicles. We saw an increase in theft of bicycles in and around town. We saw a decrease in our burglaries. We saw a decrease in our what we call people crimes, our assaults, and so on and so forth. And I think what looking at that data, what we could say is that people, because of COVID, were home. So people that would normally commute to work, take their cars with them, be gone from the house, and lock everything up are now home. And there's this, rightfully so, we should feel safe and secure in our own home, but there's also a complacency that sets in that's subconscious to us. And I can speak with personal experience. My brother-in-law had his car stolen right from his driveway, left his keys in his car, and he's a police officer. So needless to say, he got it from the family. But I think what we're seeing is that people are letting their guard down, so to speak, because we're home, everybody's here. My family's kind of been home since April. I'm the only one commuting to and from work, but you bring up a point that you saw in Morris Township. People do leave their garage doors open, that interior doors left open. We have had cases in Summit where homeowners have walked into their kitchen and saw a stranger standing in their kitchen. And looking throughout the state, we're seeing that they're getting a little more brazen in the sense that if the car is locked in the driveway or the car's in the garage door's open, the interior door's open, they pop their head in. If nobody's around, they look for the purse, they look for the keys hanging on the hook, they grab them, they go. So the message, that law enforcement is trying to put out statewide is, just lock everything up and stay vigilant.
Miguel Velez.
Thank you very much, Chief, for your presentation. In 36 years in Summit, my experiences with the police department have all been very pleasant and very productive, very helpful. So thank you. I commend you on joining the diversity task force for the city. But I do think that it's time. You might be a little bit behind the curve. Milton Irvin was the first Black chairman of the Baltusrol Golf Club 20 years ago. And 10 years ago, when I was a member of the committee to interview the new superintendent, when we asked about diversity, if they went immediately to lowering standards and bad backgrounds and negative impressions, they would be immediately disqualified. Now, I'd like to point out that that was the part of your question that you answered with. So do you equate diversity with lowering standards and accepting negative backgrounds, or do you think that there are positive members of the Black and brown communities that could be possible members of your force? Even the old guard now has a diversity task force. The old guard, mind you.
I absolutely agree that there are qualified candidates out there from the Black and brown communities. And that is a piece that we are looking at as we look to transform our organization to best represent our community that we serve. When I talked earlier about hiring practices and looking at how we do things, when I took over, I was met with having to replace an officer. I'll be met with that same challenge in just a few weeks. What historically has been done for hiring practices is just follow the standard protocols for the city. So there is a ordinance in town, as with many law enforcement organizations, that has certain requirements, and those requirements for Summit are strictly just 60 college credits for military service, United States citizen over the age of 18. I don't see the need to lower standards to find qualified applicants. I feel that the onus is on us to recruit and find the qualified applicants. There are qualified applicants out there, and I think law enforcement as a whole has to ask themselves, to what extent are you willing to go find them so that they can best serve your department and the community? And that's the challenge that I have given to our command staff. That's the challenge that I have given to our group that makes up our hiring interview panels, is that we need to invest more time and resources to recruit and find the best people that will serve this organization and represent this community the way it deserves.
Next question, Peter Merritt. Peter, you got muted again. You have to unmute again. Go ahead.
I'm curious, Chief, about your experience in the UK and what were your major takeaways from that experience?
My experience in the UK, I was in the UK for training, I believe it was 2016, as one of the delegates for the state of New Jersey. And our role there was really just to kind of learn how policing is done in the UK. And if you're not aware, one of the major differences between policing in the United Kingdom and policing in the United States is the fact that the UK police officers do not carry firearms, where in the US they do. So that was a big, one of the big topics for us from both sides of the globe there, in how policing is done and what the mindset is. And the takeaways really for us and for me was to look at policing in the sense that policing was first really, not first founded, but if we kind of take a quick history lesson back, when law enforcement first became about in the United States, and this is a very quick, brief overview, police officers were trained on how to use their hands. That was how they got compliance, that was how they enforced laws. From there, it escalated into different tools and weapons and so on and so forth. I think where law enforcement is, and law enforcement will never be the same going forward. And that's just a guarantee, that's the way it needs to be. That's not a bad thing, that is actually a good thing. Where law enforcement needs to be at this point is to learn how to conduct themselves and accomplish their goals and understand that the communities that they are policing and how to do that effectively in a partnership. So the takeaway really is looking how the UK, and the UK is not free of violent crime, they're not free of murders, they're just free of firearms, really. But they've developed a way to interact and use their presence, their voices, and different tactics on how to interact with the public in various situations. And that was, I can speak for all the delegates from New Jersey that went, that was an interesting topic for us because we just didn't understand it. We just didn't understand that when the UK is dealing with something as extreme as a terrorist attack, which they've had, how they do that without the same type of tools and equipment that US law enforcement has. And we did find out that they do have that same equipment. They do have all the armored cars and so on and so forth that US law enforcement has to deal with those situations. But it's very specific to elite groups, but the average police officer is a peace officer. And that's kind of how they approach their job. And that's, I think, where law enforcement in the United States needs to start looking at is how we best protect the community, how we best serve the community across different aspects. And we're dealing with things that law enforcement never really thought about in the past. And law enforcement has become just let's look at the terminology law enforcement. It lends itself to identifying us as dealing with people that break the law. And I think that's the wrong outlook. I think that's the wrong concept. I am not a law enforcement officer. I am not somebody that enforces the law. That is not my role. That was not my role as a patrolman. But my role is across a broad spectrum. I do have to enforce the law, but not everybody I come in contact with. And the reality is upwards of 98% of the people I come in contact with are not breaking the law. So they shouldn't be approached as if they were. And I think that's kind of the message and the direction that law enforcement needs to go. And as I stated earlier, I'm excited to see the different changes that are going to be coming down from the Attorney General's office, because that is the direction that they're looking at as well, is to kind of take law enforcement to that next step and re-image how we do business.
Bill Tittle had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chief, for your service as well as for this presentation. This is a difficult question, and but I just have to say it. I think your department is of excellent quality from everything I can see, but there's some cases that are troubling to me, where police have been accused of really dangerous crimes against society, but they're very seldom tried. And I can understand that it's difficult. They're doing a tough job, but how do you feel, if you understand, if I've been clear in describing this issue, how do you feel personally about this?
Well, I think that the changes that are coming down from the state, specifically internal affairs, and that is something that the Attorney General had come out early on in June to talk about, In New Jersey, the way the internal affairs process works is that speaking from a local municipality, local law enforcement organization that only has 46 people, and mind you, we could just look very close to the town of Winfield in Union County that has about 15 officers, all the way up to Elizabeth that has, hundreds of officers. The process is the same. So the process is the same no matter what organization you're with, law enforcement organization you're with in New Jersey, and it leaves that internal affairs investigation locally to the department. Now, that's not to say that that's the wrong thing or the bad thing, because while the investigation might be conducted internally, the decision to prosecute does not rest with the local municipality, does not rest with the police department, the chief, the mayor, the governing body, so on and so forth. That strictly rests with the county prosecutor in the county that the organization is with. Changes that are happening now, or discussions that are happening now, and changes that are being considered now is to that internal affairs process. One of the biggest changes that we saw come out was the use of force reporting, that where in the past that was handled locally within the organizations, how use of force was categorized and how use of force was reported. That is no longer the case. That is all done now at the state attorney general's level. So I think by having that larger organization for the state as the oversight is going to help curtail some of those concerns that you talked about. And it's also going to, as a law enforcement executive, it's going to make our jobs easier to be able to deal with these cases as they come in, because we do not have the ability to kind of handle them in-house. Organizations don't have the ability to handle them in-house. They are accountable. And that's really what law enforcement, when I say law enforcement will never be the same going forward, as it should not be. Law enforcement needs to be held accountable at all levels. So this is a big piece. This is something that is new, something that officers that had joined the force back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s look at us and say this is gone too far, but it's not. I say the complete opposite. As Miguel had pointed out earlier, the time was prior, not today. But we can't fix where we were, but we have to recognize where we were. We have to identify that there's a need for change, and then we have to set what that road's going to look like going forward. And I think taking those steps that the Attorney General is taking is going to be helpful. It's not going to be accomplished all at once, but instituting body cameras is a big one for law enforcement in New Jersey. Changing and reviewing our use of force policies is a big one for law enforcement. Internal affairs processing is another big one for law enforcement. Mandatory and mandated drug testing is huge for law enforcement. So all these things that come together as a chief officer really makes my job easier to make sure that our organization is functioning in a professional way.
Next question is from Bobby Sen.
Extremely informative presentation. And I have a question. I live in Chatham Township, and I have a combination lock with code attached to the garage that we have. Now, we do go away for a couple of weeks at times, nobody in the house. We keep one of the lights on. How safe is it to do that?
I wouldn't say it's unsafe. As long as your home is locked up, you have your lights on. Now, the concern obviously would be that if you're gone for an extended period of time and that one light is on, that might give an indication that nobody is home. Some of the very basic tips that you can enact is have somebody either, depending on how long you're going to be gone, either contact the post office and stop your mail from delivery so that mail doesn't pile up, or have somebody pick up that mail for you every day. Same thing for packages. If you have the ability to have your lights on a timer or a lamp on a timer, that would be something that I would recommend, different parts of the house. But I would get in touch with the local police department in your town and ask them if they have a vacation home program. It may go under a different name, or a vacant house program. Here in Summit, we have a program such as that, as our vacant home check program, where residents can check in with the police department to let us know that they're going to be away for an extended period of time. And what we do is we just add that residential address to our daily patrol logs as an FYI to the officers to say, hey, while you're out there doing your residential patrols, here's one house we know of that's not occupied, and it's not going to be occupied for quite some time. So if you do see anybody in and around that property, chances are that they may not belong there. And what we do in that program is we ask the homeowner a series of questions. Do you have somebody coming to pick up your mail? Obviously, if somebody is going to be on the property, we'd like to know about that. Is anybody going into your house to feed pets or anything like that? And just gives the officers more information to know what's going on in that property. So my recommendation to you, sir, would be to follow up with Chatham Police Department, see if they have a program such as that. You might find that reassuring and helpful for you.
Next question, Paul Tukey.
Oh, Andrew, thank you for an outstanding presentation. It's really very wonderful. I'm also so pleased to hear of all of your initiatives and ways to make policing better in Summit. And I'm really very impressed. So here's a totally different question. We at Old Guard, when we meet in person, as I think you know, we meet in the New Providence Council Chamber, which is also the courtroom over there. And so we're very aware of the 9/11 call center that's in that building, the municipal center. And we're very aware of the fact that Summit has combined with New Providence and I think a couple other towns to share that resource. And also, I think, to share the courtroom and maybe the council chamber, I'm not sure. So, and in the past, we've also had we actually got a tour of the call center. And it was really, I was very impressed with that. A couple of years ago, we had a presentation by a woman who's an advocate of having local towns in New Jersey share services to reduce costs and ultimately reduce taxes and so on and so forth. So 2 quick questions for you. How has the shared services with New Providence and the call center been working out from your point of view, from the Summit Police point of view? And the second question, which is goes way into the future, is do you think there will be opportunities to increase our shared services across towns?
So let me take the first part of your question first. How's it going? Well, in the midst of a pandemic, we had a new chief of police in Summit. We had a new chief of police in New Providence, and we had a new executive director for the Emergency Communications Center, all happening between the months of April and June. As part of the interview panel for the new director for the Communications Center, which is in its 6th year, I'm happy to report that Jeremy DeMar, who's the new executive director and came to us from Springfield, Massachusetts, is doing a phenomenal job. And with 3 new agency heads, with myself, Chief Gazaway, and Director Moore, we kind of got together, and one of the first things was, what can we do better? Let's look at what we're doing. Let's look at how we're servicing, and the communities involved are Summit, New Providence, and Millburn. But specific to Summit, New Providence, because we are very similar communities and within the same county. The Communication Center is also going under a review process of internal processes and organizational structure and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we worked with them on was the incorporation of a quality assurance person within their staff. So where we've never had it before, we now have, or they now have, an individual reviewing all the calls for service that come in through the emergency 911 call line and the non-emergency numbers for New Providence, up in Millburn, and just gauge how their dispatchers are interacting with the community. And one of the takeaways that we found in looking at some of that data is that specifically in Summit and New Providence, residents are not aware that they're speaking to a separate entity. They do think that they are speaking to the Summit Police Department, and they do think they're speaking to the New Providence Police Department. And that has created some challenges for us. When each of our agencies had dispatch operations within our own department, we had supervisory police officers overseeing that. So we got to control how calls were answered, how the dispatchers interact, and the questions that would get asked, so that our officers were responding to calls for service with as much information as possible. That kind of got lost a little bit in the development of the new center, where the new center brought in dispatchers across police, fire, and EMS disciplines. And there was a period of time where you had fire dispatchers that know their jobs inside and out were sitting on the police desk and not knowing exactly how to ask questions and answer calls. I'm happy to say that that is no longer an issue today that we saw, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So I think, it's working out very well. There is discussions about bringing on, I think, Springfield Fire into that center. I'm excited to see the changes that are coming forward from them. And, that is something we're reviewing. It's very possible that hopefully none of you all will need to call the 911 center. But if you do, you might very well hear in the future that they answer the phone simply identifying themselves as a 911 emergency call center and not the Summit Police Department, because that has created some issues for us. You are correct that the city of Summit and New Providence share municipal court services, and that does take place in the New Providence Council Chamber courtroom there. I do know that City Administrator Rogers and soon to be retired Administrator Doug Marvin from New Providence have been in communication about additional services that can be shared between the two communities, because we do work very close together. And if I am correct, I do believe that some of the new services that kind of went into effect late last year was sharing of municipal Department of Public Works services between the two municipalities. So it is ongoing conversations. There's nothing, so to speak, on the table for shared services right now between our two police departments, other than what we already have. But Chief Gazaway and I are in constant communications on how we can, better serve both our communities, because it doesn't stop at the borders, and we know that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
We've reached 11:34. Chief Bartolotti, do you have 5 to 10 more minutes that you can give to us? We have 4 more questions.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay, next is Jim Landwehr.
Hi, thanks. Very interesting presentation. My question is about mental health resources that may be needed for certain emergency police calls and so on. You have those sort of resources available within your own staff? You have access to nearby or regional things? In other words, when all these issues that come up, it seems like a certain amount of times really what's needed is not force so much as appropriate mental health expertise. And is that available, or is that an area for improvement?
It's a very good question, and I thank you for asking that question. Another one of the programs that came down from the state that we are a part of is the Officer Wellness and Resiliency Program. And what that program does is we have trained staff, personnel on staff that are trained in just the initial onset and identification of mental wellness issues. And then we do have a referral service out for officer referrals. We have a couple of local psychologists in town that work with us when we need that assistance. And we've taken the next step, the police department and the city's safety and health committee earlier this year at the start of the pandemic quickly realized that mental health issues are going to transcend past the police department, that they're going to transcend into not only officers' families, but more importantly and more concerning within the community. So what we have been looking at and working on is bringing mental health services into the city through the police department for the benefit of the community. As I mentioned earlier, police officers, they get called for any kind of call for service, whether it's a law enforcement issue or not. We are usually the first ones to encounter somebody that may be suffering from a mental incident that needs services that would be beyond the scope of what law enforcement could offer. And I think, that kind of ties all back into where I said 2020, policing will never be the same, and how law enforcement has to look at themselves and how we conduct ourselves going into the future and re-image ourselves, is that typically how law enforcement would deal with somebody suffering from a mental illness. We get called to that scene, it would be approached from a law enforcement position, mentality. We're here to enforce the law. You're not behaving normal, so to speak. We're going to take you into custody or so on and so forth. That cannot be the case anymore. So very quickly, we realized that the health pandemic was probably going to slingshot people into a series of depression. I'm seeing it, in my own children, that I have a freshman in high school and a senior in high school, two most critical parts of high school. locked down in their homes for months on end, and the impact that has had. So if I'm seeing it locally in just a 14 and a 17-year-old, think about the people that have lost their jobs because of this pandemic, or just jamming a family together and just being on top of one another, what that causes. People that are out of work, homeless people that are in town that are looking for resources they used to get that may not be there anymore. So what our Safety and Health Committee and the Police Department is doing is trying to, we are bringing those resources together, and those resources are going to come from and are coming from local, with professionals within the community of Summit, organizations such as Bridges Outreach, SAGE, and Overlook Hospital, and then really leveraging the county Department of Human Services and the resources that they can bring in. I will say, sir, that we are never at a loss for resources. So if your question is kind of geared with, you have information that would be beneficial to me, I would certainly ask you, if anybody out there does. It's one of the things that we recognize internally and externally as being extremely important as we go forward.
Next question, Alan Chenoweth.
Oh, thank you. I'm just recalling an incident many years ago now when a couple of armed chaps came to my door and demanded to enter the house, but I was able to slam the door on them and they ran away, luckily. Never forgot that incident of these two young fellows drawing a gun on me, and I think we were pretty lucky that day. But my question is, thinking about that scam of someone from the water company coming to my door and the advice to ask for the ID. How do I know if the ID is not fake? What any advice on how to?
That, sir, is an excellent question. Excellent question. And with technology today, it's very, very simple to even fake a police ID. As a matter of fact, we're looking at our new IDs internally and realizing even if we went to professional developed ID, it still looks like somebody made it at home on a laser print. What I would say to you is this: the best practice for that is you got two options. You can call the organization. So in this case, your example is the water company. You'll call the water company and ask them outright, do you have a representative by the name of Mr. Smith, who is in the area of 123 Main Street, Summit, New Jersey? The other option is you call the police department and give us a call. For the most part, when we're talking about utility work, nothing happens utility work-wise. Any work that you see on the street, none of that happens without the city knowing about it. So the city engineer's office will know that the work is being conducted. The police department, our traffic unit, will know that the work is being conducted. This is going to tie back into when you make that call, you're talking to the dispatch center. So that's why we want to make sure going forward that the public knows who they're speaking to, because you want to speak to the police department, not necessarily the dispatch center, but that's an internal process that we'll work out. So that would be my answer to you. Call the utility company themselves with that ID in hand and ask that question, or call the police department if you're unsure. Bottom line is, if you are unsure, even if that person is a legitimate person, close the door, shut the door, and let us or that employee deal with it. That's the answer. Don't feel compelled that because you can't validate who they are that you should let them in anyway. That would be the wrong answer.
Tom Forager.
I just read that the Summit noise control ordinance, and I see that there's a limit of 65 decibels from residential properties from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Is this ordinance ever enforced against gas-powered leaf blowers, which easily exceed 65 decibels, and if so, how?
So the best way for me to answer that question is to let you know that one of the city's council committees is actually looking at that exact question and scenario right now. There's been a lot of concern coming out of residents in Summit regarding excessive noise, and leaf blowers has been the example. The committee is looking at how they can best address that. If there is anybody on this call that's from the area of the Bristol Myers Squibb location down on Morris Avenue, We've gotten a lot of, the city engineer's office got a lot of complaints on noise coming out of that. I can tell you the police department does not deploy decibel reading equipment. So we don't monitor that from a decibel standpoint. But code enforcement is working with the city's committee on how to best address that scenario that you speak about.
The next question, the last question, is from Ed Atkin.
I'll make it short. Have you had any EO violations in Summit at all?
That's an interesting question in the sense that there are so many executive orders out there. To say that we've had violations that warrant action, no. Have we had missteps and misinterpretation on executive orders? Absolutely. Our role as the police department, as a community partner, is not to hammer down on individuals and organizations and businesses. Our initial step from day one, and that's guidance that we get from the county prosecutor's office and the state, is because everything was so new to everybody, it was about education. So as the governor puts out new orders, there is a tendency to misinterpret that order, misunderstand that order. Now, with that being said, we have not, fortunately, had a need to enforce any of the orders because of widespread defiance in those orders. So we have not, as you've seen in other communities around the state, we have not had mass gatherings of private parties at homes, pop-up gatherings, so on and so forth. Restaurants not adhering to the parameters put in place in those orders that we've had to come in and shut down. The most recent one that we had handed, not necessarily handed, but were consulted on, it was more so the city's health department, was the restaurants in town that decided to close down because they had some staff that were infected. And that was just conversations that were had between the business owners and the city organizations, what would be best for the public. And really, that's kind of what we're doing.
Okay, that's all the questions. Marv, it's back to you. And just one announcement. In a moment, I'm going to make it so that anyone can unmute themselves. You know why. It's part of our closing ceremony. So stay quiet until the right moment. Okay, Marv, it's up to you now.
Thank you. Chief, thank you for your presentation again. As I said before, very informative and educational. We have two ways to thank our speakers. The first is through a certificate, which I think Mark has just put on the screen, which will be sent to you. If you were in person in New Providence, we would have handed it to you. And as you can see, on the lower left is the orchid, which was the symbol. It was the orchid Summit was the orchid capital of the East back in 1930 when we were founded. The second way of thanking the speaker, we would have given you a rousing ovation if you were in person in New Providence. Now we all, if you can see, we all try to applaud as best as possible. Yay! Very much.
Mark, thank you. I want to say thank you for the invitation. When Marv and I first spoke, I think it was back in right before the 4th of July, I think it was. This seemed like it was way into the distant future. And I could tell you, it really seemed like the time span between then and now was about 2 days. We have been extremely busy, and I appreciate the time that you all have afforded me to come here and share what I was able to share with you today. As always, the police department's here to serve our community as best we can. If there's anything we can ever do for anybody, please don't hesitate to ask. And again, I just want to leave you with best wishes for a exciting new 2021 going forward across all avenues. And I wish all of you a healthy and happy holiday season, and that you all stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.